Well, this is it. The end of the line. Did Kojima know that this would really, truly be the end? Did he know it would end like this? Who would have thought it would end like this? But I got a lot to say about this one, so let's get started. Metal Gear Solid 5 releases 2 games, Ground Zeroes and The Phantom Pain. Now, I've heard varying stories as to why that is. Some say Ground Zeroes was always going to be sold before The Phantom Pain, or Ground Zeroes was sold ahead of time just to conjure up some extra funds for The Phantom Pain. Not that it matters, I really consider the whole thing bullshit. It would be like if Metal Gear Solid 2 released the Tanker chapter a year before the Plant chapter, and I fear more games will do this in the future. Metal Gear Solid 5 began development in 2011 as part of Project Ogre. Kojima promised that the game would be a more open-world type of game compared to the linear style of previous Metal Gears. The decision was made to develop Metal Gear Solid 5 as a cross-generation multi-platform game coming from the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in addition to its successors, the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Kojima returned as director and producer of the game. Harry Gregson Williams returned to produce the music for The Phantom Pain, but did compose Ground Zeroes music bizarrely enough. To begin with the controversy of this game, David Hayter did not return to reprise his role as Snake. In his place was 24 actor Kiefer Sutherland. The comment on the voice actor change, Kojima stated, "What we're trying to accomplish is to recreate the Metal Gear series. It's a new Metal Gear game, and we wanted to have this reflected in the voice actor as well." David Hayter seemed sad to say goodbye to the role of Snake. "It's been 15 years, 9 games, and an enormous blast to undertake. If it were my choice, I would do this role forever. To hear anyone else's voice coming out from Snake's battered throat makes me a little ill, to be honest. But the truth is, it's not my choice. Any and all casting decisions are the sole purview of Hideo Kojima and Konami itself. And that's fair, and I'll get by. I am not lacking for employment on any level, but I didn't want anybody to think that I was intentionally abandoning them. And know that I will miss this job and this character very much. Now, a quick comment, I don't really mind Kiefer Sutherland, but Snake was such an iconic character, and David Hayter's voice was a big part of his identity. It also seems odd that everyone else from Peace Walker reprised their roles with the exception of Snake. Let's analyze David Hayter's vocal evolution throughout the series.
Fire! I already know that Metal Gear is nothing but a nuclear-equipped walking deathmobile.
Nuclear? What are you talking about?
The terrorists are planning to use Metal Gear to launch a nuclear missile. You telling me you didn't know?
They're gonna put a dismantled warhead into Metal Gear's TMD missile module?
Wrong. From the beginning, the purpose of this exercise was to test Metal Gear's nuclear launch capability using a dummy nuclear warhead.
That's right.
Foxhound was disbanded. Huh? Where were you before Foxhound? Delta Force?
Volgin will come. I'm sure of it. You must get me out of here before then.
Leave it to me.
By the way, your Russian is superb. Where did you learn to speak it?
From my mentor. Rat Patrol, huh? They sound sneaky.
I used them.
I suppose you were the one that brought them to Columbia in the first place, huh?
Guilty as charged. Paz wasn't just CIA, you know.
Did he get better or get worse as time went on? Now the main controversy of the game. As development wound down, it became increasingly obvious that Hideo Kojima and Konami's relationship was rapidly deteriorating, and this would probably be his last game for Konami. Konami issued a communications block for Kojima, and all his employers to the point where they could barely promote the game building up to its September release. They also went out of their way to remove a Hideo Kojima game from the games box, something that had been a staple of every other Metal Gear game. It felt like Konami was just being petty. Rumor has it Konami was not happy with how much money Kojima poured into making Metal Gear Solid 5, which I've heard was around $80 million. And considering how much was cut from Metal Gear Solid 5, because let's be honest, the game is around 75% completed despite that. You'd figure that would be more than enough money to make a complete game, but considering how much was cut, such as Chapter 3, where was Kojima pouring this money? It makes sense that Konami would be unhappy with the idea of pouring $80 million into one game considering they've cut all development of all AAA games and are instead releasing pachinko machines. Sales-wise, across all platforms, including sales for both Ground Zeroes and the Phantom Pain, Metal Gear Solid 5 has sold over 8 million copies worldwide, the PS4 version selling the most copies overall. Considering the game's overall budget of 80 million, I'd say the game has more than made back its budget, but for Konami, it's just not enough anymore. Metal Gear Solid 5 received very positive reviews from critics, but fan reception was a bit more mixed, with many angry at the cut content, and I think it's unfortunate, but that cut content is the nature of the industry. Metal Gear Solid 5's story begins just a few months after Peace Walker in 1975. Mother Base is preparing for a nuclear inspection, which Huey has insisted will make Mother Base paragons for world peace. Meanwhile, Paz is turned out alive and has been captured by the XOF agent Skullface. Chico, upon learning that Paz is alive and being held hostage, breaks in and attempts to rescue her, only to end up captured himself. Big Boss heads to Camp Omega to rescue both Chico and Paz on the day of the inspection. Successfully extracting Chico and Paz, they discover there's a bomb in Paz's chest, and in one of the most brutal scenes in MGS history, we're treated to a grotesque view of Paz's insides as they remove the bomb. Upon arriving back at Mother Base, they discover that it's under attack. Big Boss and Miller escape as Miller laments Mother Base's destruction.
They played us like a damn fiddle!
Paz wakes up and reveals she has another bomb inside her. 9 years later, Snake wakes up in a hospital. He's missing an arm, and after inputting some information to change her appearance, yeah, remember that in Metal Gear Solid 2 where you had to input your information? Let's just say it's very similar to that, keep that in mind. But the doctor and the nurse are killed by an assassin. Before she can kill Snake, a mysterious man by the name of Ishmael appeals and saves him. Making their way out of the hospital, they make their way past SOF agents who are sent to kill him. A mysterious man on fire and a freaky child who is obviously Psycho Mantis as a kid show up. Ocelot shows up and saves Snake. After recovering and going by the name Venom Snake, Ocelot briefs Snake on the location of Miller and the state of the world in the 9 years he's been asleep. Snake rescues Miller and takes him to their new Mother Base. Snake, Miller, and Ocelot begin making their plans to take revenge on Skullface and Cypher. Suspecting Huey Emmerich of treachery due to the fact that he conveniently disappeared during the inspection, they receive a message from Emmerich saying he wishes to defect. On the way there, Snake is confronted by the sniper Quiet, and after a boss battle, Snake elects to take Quiet with him. On his way, Snake encounters the Malapod from Peace Walker, who makes a curious observation.
It's not you, is it?
Eventually, Snake finds Emmerich and extracts him from XOF, but not before evading Metal Gear Solid Lamprobus. Emmerich has since become a lying weasel, but he has his uses, so they recruit him anyway. As he continues to make contracts to disrupt Cypher and find Skullface, eventually Snake rescues some child soldiers and takes them back to Mother Base. On his way to rescue a friend of the boys named Shibani, Snake discovers victims who are infected with some kind of parasite. After another encounter with Psycho Mantis and a man on fire, Snake is called to find and extract the White Mamba. Snake takes the White Mamba to Mother Base, who is known by Eli, and he's obviously liquid. I mean, look at him. It's so obvious. Shortly after that, an outbreak of the parasite plague hits Mother Base, and Snake must quickly find an old man by the name of Code Talker to cure everyone. So after that's solved, another round of interrogation with Huey, who divulges the location of Skullface, Snake goes to find Skullface, who reveals his plan and motives are to eliminate the English language to get revenge on Zero for abandoning him, and yada yada yada, whatever, I don't care. Suddenly, baby Psycho Mantis activates Metal Gear, using Eli's immense hatred of Snake because, I guess he can do that? Snake fights and disables Metal Gear, and they take their revenge on Skullface. But they also take Metal Gear with them back to Mother Base, and thus Chapter 1 ends. Chapter 2, well, this is where things really fall apart. Sure, things happen, there's another viral outbreak at Mother Base, Huey gets exiled, Quiet basically goes and presumably dies in the desert, Eli makes his way out in Metal Gear and the child soldiers and is never seen again for the rest of the game. Now, yes, I know this is going to be resolved in the unfinished Mission 51 where you fight Metal Gear, this time with Eli piloting it, and then the final mission is basically you replaying the prologue mission, but finding out you have not been playing as Big Boss, you've been playing as the medic from the end of Ground Zeroes, who is essentially supposed to be you, and that comes to the big twist. This Big Boss, Venom Snake, is the one who Solid Snake later kills in Metal Gear 1. Oh, and there's also some cassette tapes that are unlocked after the game, which shows that Zero was really trying to help Big Boss and even had Ocelot and Eva move Big Boss around to keep him safe. That really seems odd when you consider this line of dialogue.
Zero is the cause of all this.
Which would seem to indicate that Eva and Ocelot still resented the hell out of Zero, and even Big Boss could only say that he feels a deep sense of longing and pity, and wondered if Zero really hated him. But considering that Big Boss knows that Ocelot had Zero move him around, unless Ocelot kept that from him for whatever reason, so we should know that Zero didn't really hate him. So this leads me to my overall problem with the story. It's just a bunch of random events that only barely attempt to form a cohesive narrative. You see, in other games there was a bunch of subplots. Metal Gear Solid 1 had Naomi and her family, the Fox Die virus, Liquid's motives, Snake and Meryl's character arcs, but all ultimately tied together to form a narrative and fit with the theme of the game, genes. Here, the themes are obviously meant to be revenge and race, but Chapter 2 has very little to do with race. Revenge is shown a bit more, Snake and Miller's desire for revenge against Skullface, Skullface's motives for revenge against Zero, the Man on Fire wanting revenge on Big Boss, Eli wanting revenge on his father, and the ultimate theme is that revenge leaves you empty. But the problem is neither of these themes are conveyed very well in the game proper. They're just there. There's some stuff about the virus that Skullface is looking to unleash, but you think Eli gives a damn about Skullface? No. What does baby Psycho Mantis see in Eli to ally with him? Hell if I know. Let's take this further and talk about the characters of this game. Kojima constantly stated this was going to be a game that would bridge the gap between the Big Boss era and the Solid Snake era. We were going to see Big Boss become the villain he was in Metal Gear 1 or 2. But the fact is, we don't play as Big Boss for the majority of the game. Now, this is similar to the infamous Solid Snake and Raiden twist of Metal Gear Solid 2, but there, it served a purpose, in that the whole twist was that you were essentially playing a Solid Snake simulation. But here, there's really no build-up for this twist. It just sort of goes, oh, you've been playing as a fake Big Boss the whole game, bye. Or else at the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden breaks his bond with the player and forms his own identity. Here, Big Boss essentially takes the player's identity for his own. Venom Snake is essentially a silent protagonist. He doesn't have the charm that Naked Snake or Solid Snake showed, and despite the story's claims that he, and by extension you, will become demons, it becomes incredibly hard to swallow. The way I played Venom was that I rarely killed unless I had to. And even then, Venom is shown doing things that don't paint him as too bad a guy. He rescues child soldiers, unlike Big Boss, who essentially recruits Chico into joining him in Peace Walker. He also lets Huey go, even though virtually everyone else is clamoring for his death. How does he react to the twist that he's essentially a phantom of the real deal? Based on this smirk, he doesn't seem to mind. It seems like he likes being a phantom of Big Boss, and I can't imagine why. His whole life as he knew it is gone. He's forced to live someone else's. Not to mention this whole men becoming demons thing. Let's take a look at Big Boss's big ending speech in Peace Walker.
We will forsake our countries. We will leave our motherlands behind us and become one with this earth. We have no nation, no philosophy, no ideology. We go where we're needed, fighting not for country, not for government, but for ourselves. We need no reason to fight. We fight because we are needed. We will be the deterrent for those with no other recourse. We are soldiers without borders, our purpose defined by the era we live in. We will sometimes have to sell ourselves and services. If the times demand it, we'll be revolutionaries, criminals, terrorists. And yes, we may all be headed straight to hell. But what better place for us than this? It is our only home, our heaven, and our hell. This is utter heaven.
So basically, as far as I'm concerned, at this point, Big Boss is that guy who you fight in Metal Gear 1. Was there really a need to go any further than that? Big Boss was the bad guy from our perspective in the original games, but from his perspective, he was never the bad guy. Miller is a very angry guy in this game, and to be fair, I don't blame him. Losing an arm and leg would do that to anyone, and he's kind of a dual sort of character with Ocelot since both serve as Snake's contact to Mother Base. Essentially, Miller serves as the guy who's always telling Snake that he should kill everyone and everything, while Ocelot serves as the voice of reason, effectively making them an angel-devil sort of thing. So Miller's character in this makes the most sense. He's the one who's effectively lost everything. Even at the end, the one thing he thought he had, Big Boss's support, turns out to be a lie as well. So now he's bitter at him too, and credit goes to Robin Atkin Downs for really knocking it out of the park. Ocelot is woefully underused in this game, and it feels like he's only there because every other Metal Gear Solid had him, so this one might as well too. He's also kind of boring since he serves as the voice of reason. Troy, Mr. I'm in every video game ever, Baker, said that Ocelot is essentially a different character in every Metal Gear Solid game. But let's analyze that. In Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2, he was pretty consistent, and we started to see more and more hints at the differing allegiances he had. In 3, we see a young Ocelot develop his quirks. In 4, he's a different character, but that's explicitly because he's pretending to be Liquid the whole game. Here, he feels like a boring cutout of himself. He still takes part in torture, but overall, Ocelot is just a shadow of his former great self. Huey has caused the destruction of Mother Base, used his own son as a test pilot for Metal Gear, killed his own wife, Dr. Strangelove, by locking her in the AI pod, and just overall continues to turn Mother Base into a nightmare by unleashing the virus. He turns out to be a manipulative, lying sack of shit the series has ever seen, and to be honest, I actually legitimately like this direction for this character. It actually makes perfect sense when you consider his one-off line in Peace Walker.
Man! Look at that thing move! I amaze myself sometimes. Sorry.
And his relationship with Big Boss falling apart is a perfect parallel of Solid Snake and Otacon's enduring friendship. It also adds more light to his suicide by way of drowning. He realized what kind of man he was. Quiet? Well, Kojima once said you will feel ashamed of your words and deeds once players learned why Quiet wore next to nothing. And it's the most laughable excuse I've ever heard. Quiet is nothing but Kojima giving gamers an excuse to jerk off. This whole scene, she's sexually objectified. I mean, look at this. Kojima, you weren't even trying. You deserve to be slapped across the face for this scene. You really do. Her relationship with Venom Snake is wholly laughable. Dare I say, it's worse than the Meryl and Johnny scenes in 4, and yet she's the only one who has some semblance of a character arc. I mean, she was going to infect everyone with her parasites, but then she didn't because she fell in love with Venom for reasons, I guess. Eli is, well, it's confusing. I don't really know how he went from this.
So that's why you're so obsessed with Big Boss. Some warped kind of love.
Love? It's hate! He always told me I was inferior, and now I'll have my revenge! You should understand me, brother. You killed our father with your own hands! You stole my chance for revenge! Now I'll finish the work that father began. I will surpass him! I will destroy him!
I don't know how he formed that conclusion based on what his experiences were in this game. Obviously, much of Eli's ultimate conclusion was cut. The third child, who is basically Psycho Mantis, well, many writers, when their works go on, tend to start breaking rules. This kid basically breaks every single rule Kojima had set. Let's take a look at what Psycho Mantis could do in MGS1. Telepathy, telekinesis, fourth wall breaking, and I assume this is astral projection. Here, he can do whatever the plot needs him to do. Just how was Snake able to beat him even when he was able to switch the controller port? If MGS4 was an example of Kojima bringing him back solely because he was a fan favorite, this is Kojima going the full extra mile. Psycho Mantis told us everything we need to know about his past in MGS1. Speaking of which, this makes me wonder, was there ever a point in Metal Gear Solid 1 or before it that Liquid Mantis and Ocelot went, "Hey, you remember that about 20 years ago when I took over Metal Gear and met Father's Phantom and you two were there? Oh yes, good times those were. Say, hold on,
Never get that
what were
detonation
you
code.
doing helping Father's Phantom anyway, Ocelot? See, the thing about that is, weird. Skullface, what a letdown of a villain he is. Oh sure, he's evil, but most of his actions are told instead of shown. Liquid was a manipulator, Solidus was a liberator, Volgin was a thug, Coldman was brutal, but this guy, he just fails to make an impression. I felt nothing when the characters got revenge. Maybe that was the point, hence Phantom Pain. Also, what was up with this Jeep ride? Skullface gives you this long lecture about his plans and motives. I couldn't care less, but then Donald Burke's awesome Sins of the Father starts playing because it needs something to kill time. And then at the end of it all, Skullface just begins speaking as though those last few minutes of awkward silence didn't even happen. The skulls. I said before how attempts to make Metal Gear boss battles more unique were no doubt getting exhausting. So here, they really didn't try. There's nothing unique about these guys at all. The boss battles against them completely lack strategy. They're just bullet sponges. That's all I'm gonna say about them because they're not worth more than that. The Man on Fire. I really don't get why this was done. I get that he looks intimidating, but he's really not that big of a character. And what was the point of making him Vulcan? As said Metal Gear Solid 3...
Fried by a bolt of lightning. A fitting end.
So what was the point of bringing him back? There was none. Vulcan's story had been finished, and he really doesn't do anything in this story. He just walks towards Snake menacingly, gets squashed like a bug from Metal Gear, and then there's a side-up where you have to retrieve his body. That's it! That's all there is to it! Metal Gear Sahelanthropus. You know, every Metal Gear throughout this whole saga felt unique. Different ways to battle, even in design they felt unique. This one here, it's basically just Metal Gear Rex's head on the body of one of those robots from Pacific Rim. Now, Kojima loved Pacific Rim. Loved it. Considering all the pictures he's taken with that film's director Del Toro, including the Silent Hills game that will sadly never come to be. Now, there are two ways that creators tend to write stories to long-running franchises. You either plot everything out meticulously, or you make it up as you go. Kojima was clearly doing most of the latter throughout the Metal Gear saga. The advantages of writing by the seat of your pants is that it allows you to be more open to the narrative in the event that the story and characters change from what you originally envisioned. Otherwise, let's say you plan the ending, but it turns out what you have developed leading up to that point may not exactly fit anymore. The downside, however, is that this often leads to retcons because you didn't plan on going this far, and getting from point A to point B is now awkward because you have no idea how you're going to go from point C to point D and so on, and so forth. Kojima went into Metal Gear Solid 2 thinking it would be the last and left it deliberately open-ended. Metal Gear Solid 3, he didn't try to, he just created a prequel. Suddenly in Metal Gear Solid 4, he had to answer all these questions that he had no intention of doing. So now with Metal Gear Solid 5, he had to answer questions about how Zero could suddenly be an overlaying villain, and the answer he came up with is that Zero was more of a tragic villain who had no idea what he set in motion, and this makes Big Boss putting in the piece in Metal Gear Solid 4 all the more poetic and moving. Now, on the other side of the coin, let's talk about the gameplay. And overall, I must say that Metal Gear Solid 5's gameplay really does shine. Your objectives are broken up into missions, and for the first chapter, not a single mission feels repetitive. Sometimes you're sent to extract enemies or prisoners, but there's so many different ways you can go about accomplishing these. Nothing feels more satisfying than carefully plotting out your routes, or interrogating guards is more rewarding than ever as they often tell you exactly where your target is. CQC is even more satisfying than ever thanks to the reflex time, which allows you to put down enemies before they can raise an alarm. Compared to the linear style of gameplay of the previous Metal Gears, this one features an open world where you can travel across how you see fit. Don't feel like doing a mission, just want to gather up some soldiers, go ahead and take your time. But that being said, this open world is overall lacking in design and originality. This isn't like Grand Theft Auto where you walk through a city bustling with life. This is just a desert. Every other Metal Gear game had uniqueness to their setting. This is just a desert. So there's really no reason to want to explore it unless you want to recruit soldiers. The goal is to once again build up Mother Base, and in a change from Peace Walker where you could only look at Mother Base, here you're actually allowed to explore it, and there's next to nothing in it. You can drive vehicles and climb pipes, but you can't even visit guys like Miller or Ocelot and talk to them. Well, you can visit Huey or Quiet, but there's very little point to that. Certain missions want to play up your attachment to the Mother Base, such as this mission where Snake is forced to kill several staff members to keep the virus from spreading. It would be fine, if not for the fact that I feel no attachment to Mother Base. I have very little reason to want to go there, if only because I have to occasionally shower and watch some cutscenes, but that's it. This isn't like games like Mass Effect where you get to explore, talk to characters, and gain insight into them. It's so big, and yet it's so empty. Okay, there is one side quest involving Snake seeing hallucination of past, but it really doesn't add anything to the story or characters. So that brings me to my point. This game, with its similar management of Mother Base, recruiting soldiers, and developing weapons. It's basically Peace Walker, but made for a console, and to give it credit, it does that very well. Developing weapons and recruiting soldiers has never felt more addicting or easy. There's no health bar this time around. Snake's life bar goes back up naturally, as seen in many games. This means all you have to do is go and hide, and your health will go back up, so there's no healing items like rations this time around. I generally don't have a problem with this, but there's one mission where this begins getting particularly annoying, and it's the last mission with Quiet, because you have to fend off about a dozen or so tanks. For whatever reason, they're sending out all these tanks to kill you. The plot makes no sense. The reason I obsess over this is because if you take a direct hit from a tank, you're dead. It doesn't matter if your life bar is full or what type of armor you're wearing, you will die if you get hit, which makes S-ranking this mission a real pain if you're going for that. All this frustration to save quiet. This time around, Snake has combat buddies he can take into action. The three most prominent being Diamond Horse, who basically serves as a quick and convenient way to quickly go around the open world, similar to Epona from the Legend of Zelda series. He also comes in handy on missions that require a lot of traveling, such as when you have to take out a large number of tanks, and he controls nicely too. Dee is a wolf dog that Snake can rescue, and then take into the combat field. Dee is good for sniffing out enemies and prisoners ahead of time, thus preventing the need to use your binoculars and interrogating enemies, so he comes in handy on missions that require rescuing prisoners. Quiet, well, she may be objectified, but as a combat buddy, she is damn good at taking on missions. Sniping can serve as a good diversion so you can get inside. She can also take headshot on enemies, which makes knocking out and extracting them really easy. There's also D-Walker, which I honestly never used because, why? Maybe somebody found a use for it, but I sure didn't. There's also a way to go around disarming nuclear missions to get a better ending, but honestly, I haven't done this yet, and I'm not sure if I ever will, because from what I've been told, the ending really doesn't tell you much. So Metal Gear Solid 5 is two sides of a coin. What it does well, I really love. What it doesn't do well, I don't love so much. Gameplay-wise, it's Metal Gear perfected, and it really highlights how much the series has grown. But story-wise, it feels so empty, and it's just a shame. It's obvious so much was cut. Was $80 million not enough? It clearly wasn't for Kojima to make this game the way he intended for it to be. As the game goes on, you can feel the budget just shrinking. It's a product of Kojima's dissolution at Konami, and it shows. Battle Gear was clearly intended to be used in actual gameplay instead of just sitting there and going, oh, you can only take on deployed missions, but we didn't feel like taking out the cutscenes since we worked so hard on them. Shortly after the release of The Phantom Pain, Hideo Kojima bid farewell to Konami and Metal Gear as well, a series that he worked on for nearly 30 years. Though he's made some choices I disagree with, his passion for his work was never doubted. He always sought to create new and inventive worlds for players to interact, and though as this review shows, I may not have liked every decision he's made, but through it all, he's made something many players will hold deep to their hearts. Metal Gear was a journey, not just for me, not just for many other players, but for Kojima as well, and that journey has finally come to an end. What new worlds will he create now? We'll have to wait and see. He created a saga that will live on in gamers' memories, a series that asks us questions about nuclear deterrence, our own sense of identity, and what we pass on to the next generation. And what will Metal Gear mean to future generations? In that sense, Metal Gear will live on. But what will you tell people about these games? Throughout all, Snake was there, whether it was Solid or Naked or even Venom. Snake will go into the video game Hall of Fame where he so rightfully belongs. But now Snake in the Metal Gear series can finally rest, and Kojima can start anew. Perhaps one day there will be another version of Metal Gear, but who really knows at this point? Only time will tell. But for me, I tip my hat to Kojima for the many years of Metal Gear. Thanks for the journey, I'll never forget it.